Welcome back to License to Listen. I'm Michelle, and I'm here with my co-host, Nancy. And today we have a very special guest, and I'll let you do the honors, Nancy.
Okay, yes. We're really excited to introduce you to our guest and continue the discussion around domestic violence. We're going to be talking about coercive control, identifying it, and how to move on in a positive way, and a bit about navigating the legal system when you're a survivor of domestic violence. So I want to introduce you to our guest. We're thrilled to have Lori Bassinger joining us today. Lori is a dedicated family lawyer, advocate, and mother. She's committed to helping women overcome controlling relationships and reclaim their power. She has had a decade-long personal journey through the probate and family court system, and she currently works in the domestic violence field as an attorney. She states that her mission is to equip women with the practical tools they need to move forward strategically, emotionally, and professionally, and financially, and to help guide them toward healing. So welcome, Lori, and thanks again for taking time to meet with us.
Welcome, Lori. Is there
you.
anything that we didn't mention that you want to add about yourself?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I would say, no, I think you did a good job. Maybe just the fact that I've, have had both a personal and professional experience, and that's why I'm so interested in this. But
Well, we really appreciate you joining
Yes.
us. And
Thank you.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Lori and I have been friends since college, and I can vouch for how dedicated and committed she is to the cause of helping, empowering, and supporting survivors of domestic violence. And I also want to put a little addition that she also has a pharmacy degree.
Nice. Great.
So,
Thanks,
Michelle, you want to
Nancy.
just mention that one little thing we wanted to say?
Sure. Today's topic might be triggering, so if you're listening and you need a break, please take one and take care of yourself. And Nancy, Lori, and I want to be clear that today's topic is for general information and educational purposes only. So this is not a substitute for legal advice from an attorney.
Right.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
Let's
Okay.
get started.
So, why don't you start off, Michelle?
Lori, can you share a bit about what led you to this work, both professionally and personally?
yes, so having had an experience in probate and family court for, I guess, about 10 years, it was very hard for me to realize that, the system doesn't clearly understand why somebody might be going back and forth to court over and over again. And usually it's always framed about the issue. So whether it's health insurance or child support or alimony, you don't go back and say this isn't about that. You have to address the issue that you may be returning to over and over again. And what you find when talking to other survivors or other people in this space, that they're constantly, it's confusing, and they always, the question usually is, how can I make it stop? So usually when you're asked that question, you kind of realize it's probably a situation where somebody's going back and forth in a way that might not really be about the legal matter at hand.
Okay. And for you, was there a moment where things shifted, where you realized you wanted to kind of pursue this career?
Yes, I would say that when you sort of see that most of, I think, the probate and family court in Massachusetts, most of the court personnel or the court system is not trauma informed, then I think it was really important for me to both pursue like being part of the trauma informed system and, on the side working on like changing the system through legislation and other means too.
Thank you. How does court typically proceed, and what do you think is the experience that's typical for a survivor?
So let's say the typical survivor might be coming into the probate and family court from a custody or a divorce proceeding and assumes that, whether or not they might not know what's going on themselves. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to just say, I can't stay in this relationship, or I can't stay in this marriage, or we can't agree about the children. And then they think that they're going to go in. Most survivors do think they're going to go into the court system and it's going to they're going to see it and resolve it. Mm-hmm. What happens is that it's usually marked by non-resolution of an issue.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. And before we proceed with more of the court talk, can you explain to our listeners a little bit about the difference between, let's say, an advocate and a lawyer and a therapist in the court system? Just
Yeah.
briefly. We can help with
Yeah.
the therapist part, but
Yes. So, right. So, in the court system, or in if you go to a legal service agency, or in the Commonwealth in many states, it's like, agencies for survivors. You might come in through an advocate. An advocate might be somebody who's trying to help somebody navigate the system, whether it's, rent and attorneys and maybe their health. They're trying to basically be a voice, somebody is advocating for the person that's in need. As you know, you can explain very well what a therapist is, how that person might be connected to the advocate, might connect somebody to a therapist, and they also might connect somebody to a lawyer so that the lawyer can then usually deal with the specific legal issues and help the client with the specific legal. Whether or not they help them in court, they can also provide some support for them.
okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Lori, I'm guessing you've seen survivors be re traumatized through the legal system. And I'm wondering if you could speak on how that might be, where it does re traumatize survivors of controlling or abusive relationships.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, many survivors are brought to court because they might not be seeing their abusive partner at all. So we'll give an example that, people can come in, and we'll explain a little bit more about the breakdown of the courts, but they might be actually be in an experience when they're not seeing their abusive person, but the abuser might use the court system, so they have to see them, have to be in the same room, have to, go to a restraining order hearing against them. They also are thinking that the court system will see it, understand what this really is, that they're actually being abused. And, sometimes survivors are actually accused of being the abuser. And that, and so they could be re-traumatized by that and by not being understood and not actually helping the person keep the other person at bay.
And can you elaborate a little bit more on what happens, like step by step, when a survivor comes to your office? What steps
Yeah.
do you typically take?
Okay. So they might come in. I'm a family lawyer and I help people with abuse prevention orders. We also typically see immigration lawyers in this space too, because usually immigration courts used. So someone might come in and say, I might get a survivor who has not, as the filer, might say this is impossible. There's physical or emotional abuse going on at home, or different types of abuse, which we'll get into. And I want to file. Like, how can I file? How can you help me file a divorce? And I might explain to them what the court laws are and how the court might proceed in this situation. I equally see somebody who might come in and say that they want to have an abuse prevention order or a restraining order. And I might help them understand the process and maybe fill out an affidavit, paperwork, and maybe represent them in that. So those are usually the two ways we see them enter into the court system. There's other ways, but sometimes they enter in with small claims court, sometimes it's immigration court. Typical courts that they'll enter into are ways that they might be entwined. I specifically am dealing with probably mostly intimate partner abuse, so I'm going to see them in family court or in restraining order hearings.
Okay. So maybe we should get into a little bit about what controlling relationships look like and what is coercive control. So, Lori, what's your definition of coercive control, and how are you seeing it come out in your work with women?
Okay. I, like to follow in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts definition. I mean, basically it's patterned behavior, but I'm going to give you a little bit about, not specifically, but Massachusetts defines it as a pattern intended to threaten, intimidate, harass, isolate, control, or coerce compliance of a family member and or a household member to have a reasonably fear physical harm or have a reduced sense of physical safety or autonomy. I really like the reduced sense of autonomy. Massachusetts fought hard for that. And they list a whole bunch of ways that might include financial abuse. It might include isolation. It might include depriving them of basic necessities, intentionally damaging property, stalking. There's a whole not an inclusive list that Massachusetts and the other states do. So it's sometimes it's very subtle, not so obvious ways that survivors are harmed, and give examples
Well,
if you'd
yeah,
like.
we were going to pick up on that and just ask you a little bit about examples of maybe what financial abuse is, let's say.
Okay. Financial abuse can be very subtle, right? Somebody's really controlling the finances, but to way to the outside world doesn't seem so obvious. Like, oh, I couldn't find they might hide the survivor's pocketbook or hide the keys, in a way that if they go to explain it, it's really confusing, prevent them from going to work, or, oh, I forgot, I didn't know I shut the credit card off. So sometimes it's very subtle.
Mm.
Sometimes it's extremely obvious, right? You're not allowed to have your own money. People aren't allowed to control the finances. They're not allowed to work. And sometimes it's a little bit more even like in high stakes financial. It might be not exactly sharing all the information. It's people who have lots of resources, but maybe they don't share all the financial statements or they're inaccurate. So it's a broad spectrum, which is why it's sometimes hard for the survivor to explain it to people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. How would you recommend that women prepare financially and professionally before they make a transition?
Oh, such a good question. That's such a good question. That they document, right? In addition to, I think, you hear that, I hear the clients are frequently told to journal from therapists and healers, but equally important is to document the patterns of behavior, to try to, if they have, clearly if they have obvious like texts or pictures or things that are like, the other person telling them something clearly, but sometimes it's documenting more subtle things. I couldn't find, again, the keys 20 times, or this was shut off, the credit card was shut off X amount of times, recording dates and history. So they actually, courts respond to facts, and they need to have them.
Yeah.
And I just want to pick up on that. Can women keep copies of texts? Is that used in the court system?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you don't want to keep those, out, or you want to keep them safe, or you want to make sure that if you share, your iCloud accounts or other accounts, you want to make sure that they're not that you're not actually telling the other party what you're doing, or sometimes they track your phone records. I mean, so you might want to discuss that with the appropriate person, but you definitely want to be keeping copies of texts and those records.
It's a good question. Lori, I don't know if this is accurate or not, and I'm curious if you know. I've heard clients or former clients ask before, oh, I'm going to record my partner being angry, but I thought that's illegal to do without someone's permission in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes, there's wiretapping laws, which they're using trying to change, that if somebody doesn't know they're being recorded and you try to use it. Now, will see sometimes district court judges or people seeing in them restraining orders, whether or not they should be used.
Okay.
But you have to be careful about that too, because the other party could charge you with, even if they're not going to win, they could charge you with that crime. Right. I'm not an expert on the wiretapping, but you definitely, doing something without the other party knowing that you're being recorded is not helpful.
Okay. That's good for us to know too.
For that. It really
with
is.
Our clients,
yes.
Yes. And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but what would you say some red flags are for people if they are wondering, is my partner abusive? Am I in an abusive situation? Are there signs or red flags that you see in your work, patterns?
Yes. We're going to see patterns of, I guess, somebody who, we all hear the person that comes on really strong, and we're going to hear these terms that are now like, social media terms, but they are for a reason. Like, we hear the term gaslighting a lot. It's become a catchphrase, but really is making you doubt your reality, right? Somebody was like, what? I thought we talked about that, that like somebody doubting their reality a lot, somebody coming on and, again, terms, catchphrases, but they're catchphrases for a reason. Love bombing, somebody coming on strong and then going, back. There's a typical, these are non-physical. We're talking about non-physical. I mean, the signs when if somebody's aggressive with you right away, you're driving in a car, as a common example of like people who tell me that they had a nice situation and they were driving in a car with somebody and they got very aggressive with them because they're in a closed situation. So somebody yelling at you, being very aggressive, obviously being physical, those are the obvious ones, right? People are going to know, and then they usually cycle through patterns, right? We usually see abuse as a cycle. So we see somebody will be, apologetic. Oh, I didn't mean to do this. And then we'll cycle back to when they feel that they're losing the partner potentially, they will go back to the phase of trying to be apologetic and they'll cycle through the patterns. But it's much more, there's some, very good writing on this that explains why do people do this behavior? And we can talk about that later if we want for resources. But yeah, it's very confusing. Usually the survivor is confused, right? They're confused because they have it. Not every day is bad. They have good times with them, and it's very confusing.
Very confusing
relationships.
Yes, thank you for that. To piggyback on that, you mentioned on your website that women cannot make the abuser stop. And you have, we noticed in your blog, there's an excellent article on that. But can you share a little more about that women can't make the abuser stop?
Or change.
Or change.
I know. That's the hardest part, right? I mean, and then, many people who and this is not a blame or fault thing at all, get in those dynamics when they feel that, lots of survivors are very empathic. People who really are committed to the relationship want to come in and, might have a background of abuse or not, but they typically feel like if they just did the right thing or fixed it, or they tried to have, be a little bit less quiet or less bothersome, or do this a little bit better, or listen a little bit more, or try, read another article, that personality will change. And they're really not, it's almost not recognizing that the power and control dynamic is there, that the other party clearly is looking for not the same thing. Typically, they might be on the surface looking for the same thing, or maybe some part of them is, but typically the abuser is driven by power and control. And so that doesn't mean they want to be on the same page or want the same things or want everything to be, because typically that doesn't give them power and control. And that's usually why they can't make it stop.
Right. That power and control point, that's an excellent point. And we just wanted to ask you, once a survivor decides to leave, that's kind of when you see them, right? When they enter the court system. Do you still see, once that process begins, do you still see that coercive control occurring?
Oh, yes. I mean, typically when the survivor, I do see some people considering, and that's always the people I feel like so many people are, that's a wonderful case if you actually have the ability to want to learn about the divorce process or an abuse prevention, but you're not ready to jump tomorrow, so they can kind of get ready. But yes, in fact, post-separation abuse can amp when a survivor does file, right, or goes for it. In fact, sometimes that's when the abuser gets more upset and actually escalates the coercive control. So somebody, tends to be a very fragile personality. Abusers, they tend to escalate when they feel like they are losing control. And if you file for divorce, the survivor files for divorce, typically the person or custody might feel like they're losing control and they might up the control or up the, coercive behavior when
Such
this
a
is
high
happening.
risk. That's a high risk time.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah.
It really is. Lori, you refer to helping women reclaim their power on your website. What does power mean to you in that context?
It's a great question, too, because it doesn't mean that you're going to win every court battle, unfortunately, right? It means a lot of, I guess I define it as sort of being able to determine what, work with a team. Ideally, I mean, I think ideally the best survivors sometimes have an advocate, a therapist, an attorney or somebody they're talking to, a community, to kind of take back what they can do. Often the survivor is, reacting to what the abuser is doing. this person's doing that. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this there? Because they're still kind of thinking, how can I change it? Or how can I please them? Or how can I minimize it? It's really deciding what's in your interest, typically in your children's best interest, and making decisions from that place with the help of your team.
And that's a good lead into what advice you would give someone preparing to enter the system for the first time.
Yeah, right. So first of all, have a team,
Okay.
right? I mean, having a team is just so remarkable. You're not alone. You can start feeling, people say they feel like they feel so much better that they don't feel like they're, all alone, or they don't feel, I don't like the crazy word, but that is a typically used word. They don't feel that way, right? They don't feel like they're making things up and so I'd say gather all the information you can. For instance, it's helpful to know that although you would think that if, there's physical abuse, the abusive person wouldn't be alone with the children. That's not always true. In fact, most of the time it might not be true. I mean, if there's physical abuse of the mom, that doesn't mean that they won't have unsupervised visitation with the kids. And people they'll want to know that information, having those, not knowing the information, understanding where their resources might come from, understanding like how to learning non-reactive behaviors, safety planning. All of those parts are really important when you're preparing to go in.
Thank you. I'm wondering how someone might create their team who doesn't know anything about this. They're in the family court system for the first time. Would they ask their attorney, how do I find resources to get an advocate? What do you think is best in that situation?
That's a really good question, because it sometimes depends upon the person. So I would say, Massachusetts has a series of, domestic violence agencies that are all over the state, and they have a catchment area. So you can find out through JDI's website what JDI. We can talk about that too, or what is the domestic violence agency in my area, and even if that's not. Even if you're not going to qualify from a resource point of view, meaning if you're not low income, you could still find out, they typically have advocates, they might have relationships with therapists, and they might have an attorney. Through that person, you might be able to get a referral to an outside attorney. Your attorney, if you come through with a family court, maybe they wouldn't know about advocates, but they might, be able to connect you with other, therapists, and maybe that person can connect you. Finding out about groups, and obviously not all survivors are women. There's plenty of, men survivors, same-sex survivors. So finding out about groups that might support. I know Massachusetts has a few really strong groups where you could ask other people who have experienced this, like who they used, and get connected with people there. And we can talk about those two resources if you'd like to.
That's really helpful, I think, for people listening.
Yes. And your point that I know you really want to bring home is that people should not try to do this on their own, right?
No.
It's really difficult.
Devastating. And we see too many people being isolated, and, we've read too many, tragic stories. It's overwhelming if you don't have support.
Yeah.
And I just want to follow up with that and ask, how do you feel that women in particular, but men too, can reclaim sort of their power and move forward through this process?
I think making sure to, do like everything we're talking about when they're focusing on their case, but also making sure to practice self-care. You can't be doing this 24/7, right? And of course, people are going to, with the help of therapists, right? Hopefully not be ruminating all the time about this, but you need to practice self-care, have some time when you're not focused on it. Whatever that means. I mean, if you're in the middle of a legal battle and you have young children, that's extremely hard. But whatever that period of time is, they're going to need to have a little bit of time off, and then and then, as we said, like that, and then like the biggest part, as I said before, is trying to really have all of your team help you focus on your case and what you want, and be proactive versus reactive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say that I don't want to ever minimize what I'm saying. These are not easy. It doesn't mean when you're behaving this way, you're gonna, you're going to prevail.
Right.
So I don't, what it just means is you're going to figure out how to go through the system in a way that's not as harmful. And you're
Right.
going to,
Harm
gain,
reduction.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing there's some hope there. So around
Yeah.
the subject of hope and moving forward, how do you think someone could create a future beyond their controlling relationship?
Well, so many people do, right? So it will all be dependent. Like one survivor might not have children, and it might be, they get a restraining order and they determine that, if there's a violation, they call the police and they actually move beyond the relationship because there's not a lot of entanglement. For somebody who has, young children and they might be in long-term custody battles in family court, where I sometimes see people for 10 years in the family court, they're going to get there. They will get there. I mean, I've seen people come once the child is 18, there's a huge change. But before that, they will learn like to have different expectations of the other person, to not think that having to go back means they didn't win. They'll have once they have become different expectations, they'll be able to manage these events in an easier way than they could at the beginning. Once they determine that you might not be able to make it stop, but you can stop your reaction to it, that's the one I think that they feel better.
And so let's say we have listeners out there that this resonates with, and they're thinking, this is me. I know it may be hard to say first step, but what would you say a good first step would be to move forward with this process of going the legal route?
I'd first, if you're, like I said, one of the people that aren't ready to make a change tomorrow, I think it's really helpful to get a consult. You can get free consults. You can get a call from, whether it's a legal service agency, many attorneys do free consults just to find out what it is that you'd be looking at, division of property, what this would look like. What does a restraining order look like? What does it mean? Is it civil? Is it criminal? They find out everything so they know like what decisions they could make. That would be, if you're at the point that you could do that and not have to leave tomorrow, that'd be great. Start safety planning with your therapist and support groups, and then you would, once you start, if you determine that you need to file, you determine your method, whether you're going to do it with pro se support, because you can do it by your own in Massachusetts or on your own, or whether you're going to do it with an attorney, what your budget is, to really start to think through, what you're going to do. And when and if you make a mistake or a choice that didn't work for you, know that it's part of the process. It's rare that everybody keeps with the same attorney the whole time, or sometimes doesn't do some of it pro se and some of it with an attorney, or, sometimes you won't get the right, you won't have the best GAL, or that's a court appointed people that help your case. I mean, so just knowing that it is part of the process, that it's not you probably. It's probably that it's
system.
just part of learning.
Yeah. Lori, are there mistakes you see people make that you wish they could avoid?
I wish, and this is so hard because I wish, that they could be less reactive in court. I mean, sometimes it's very, very hard to see your abuser and not react. And, this trauma response you both understand better than I do. But it's your goal to be the credible one in court, right? And if you are reacting or responding or gesticulating, things that aren't helpful to survivors, or not meeting court dates, or not, not filing your documentation, not showing up. You really want to be as credible as you can and do what the court asks of you, obviously within reason. If you really don't think it's in the best interest of your child, you need to talk to somebody, but you want to make sure that you're showing the court that you're listening to the importance of their authoritative voice.
And are there ways in the court system, if a victim does not want to see the perpetrator, the abuser, are there ways that they can go through this process without having to make eye contact or see the abuser?
Boy, do I wish that were the case. When there's an abuse prevention order or a restraining order, it's the same thing as I've said. They can't put you in the same room together. So if you have to go, typically, if somebody does not have a lawyer, they're often sent to probation first in probate and family court. Probation means you might be sitting in a room alone with your abuser, but they can't do that if you have an abuse prevention order. But you can stand in a courtroom, in front of the judge with somebody. The probation officer needs to help you in and out together. But somebody who doesn't have a abuse prevention order, they could be in a room with a probation officer. I mean, typically that's a tactic of abusers to bring people there so that they will have to sit in a room with them. So I wish that were the case. Sometimes people are able to be on Zoom meetings for certain hearings, but that's not the norm.
That's really good for people to know all that. Thank you.
Do you have another one, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm wondering, for someone listening today and maybe they're afraid or they feel stuck, what's something you really want them to hear in this episode or to take with them?
That, first of all, that they, can have a different they can have a different outcome, and that people who are trauma informed, whether they're attorneys or other professionals, will understand their experiences. So no one's going to force a survivor to do something they're not comfortable with. So if somebody's considering an abuse prevention order and they want to just talk to somebody about it, no one's going to, encourage them to do something they're not ready for, they don't feel comfortable with it. They will be heard and they'll be supported where they're at. No one, like, their survivor knows their experience and what they need to do certainly better than we do.
Yes.
And so that they will be listened to. And so they don't have to fear like that finding out means they have to move in a way that doesn't feel comfortable for them.
And that sounds like that idea of, giving them choices, not re-traumatizing them. These are victims who come in maybe with very little confidence, and inability sometimes to make their own decisions. So I like to hear that you guys really try hard not to re-traumatize them.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yes.
Shifting gears a little bit, because I know you've been working on some important litigation in Massachusetts around domestic violence. Would you be willing to share some of that with us today?
Yeah. So not that long ago, we passed, the definition of abuse change in Massachusetts to include coercive control that you guys have been talking about. And that means somebody can get an abuse prevention order and a restraining order for coercive control. Are we seeing it with just coercive control? Not often. It's the pattern of behavior we talk about, but it is a reason to get it. And so a survivor can educate the judge on what's been happening. Often, some other kinds of abuse are happening, or coercive control, we say, is like the foundation of a lot of these patterns of abuse. So they might also be experiencing other kinds of abuse that include coercive control. But what's important is that Massachusetts actually recognized it as a form of abuse all by itself.
Huge.
And, so that's exciting. And that was almost about 2 years ago, people changed that legislation. So that's been very recent. And the most recent piece of legislation that we're working on right now is to prevent controlling and abusive litigation. So that would give in all courts, but let's focus on probate and family court, that would give the survivor the ability to go back and say, I'm being brought back here every, 5, 6 months, 2 months, for it looks like I have to, bring the other party back because they're not paying child support. But what this really is they're controlling me through like the court system, or I'm having to file because I'm not getting time with my child, and I'm having to do this over and over again. This has nothing to do with custody. This is controlling and abusive litigation. And two reasons that's important. Number one, it would allow the party to have a survivor to have an ability to state that. But it's really most important is because right now the survivor has to pretend that it's about the thing it's not about. They actually can't say I'm being, brought back to court over and over again. They have to pretend it's about the child support or the custody or whatever. So just giving them a voice is such a relief. Even if it doesn't happen right away, they recognize that what's happening to them is real. So that legislation is right now in the judiciary. We just got another extension through June if it's reported out as to go through the legislative process. But we're hopeful. We're hopeful that it will go forward and pass this session.
This is such important
I
work.
know.
So thank you for
And let me
everything
I
you're
just
doing.
want to ask, is there anything our listeners can do to help with this
Great.
process?
Oh, yes. If
Sorry to interrupt you, Michelle.
No, if you happen to be a constituent of Senator Lydia Edwards, she's the chair of the Judiciary, and she's that's the committee that it's in. It needs to be reported out. But you can reach out to your senator or representative and ask them to, and if you want to tell them your story, it's great, and tell them about how you support. It's Senate 1205, an act to prevent controlling and abusive litigation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So this has been really helpful and informative. We just want to make sure that we didn't forget anything that you want to add. So we want to just open it up to you if there's anything you feel like we didn't touch on that you'd like to add.
I guess just, the state resource is Jane Doe Inc., JDI. If you Google JDI, I think .org, you'll see domestic violence agencies through the Commonwealth. There is a couple of groups I think are helpful for women experiencing this. There's also Jane Does Well. That's it's a private, not-for-profit. There's no membership fees. They have a bunch of programs for women, not just experiencing they're more community-based programs, but a lot of advocacy around stuff we talked about today. And another group called Mass Family Advocacy Coalition, or MFAC. All of those are phenomenal resources, the last two being private but no cost, and the first one obviously being the public, state agency that help and give resources to people experiencing this.
Okay, so you know what? We'll put those on our... When we put this out, we will definitely add those.
We'll include those resources. Thank you. Perfect. It's really helpful to hear about domestic violence from the legal standpoint and about what survivors could experience. Lori, could you let listeners know if they have any legal questions around the topic of domestic violence? Would you recommend that they go specifically to these resources, or is there anything else you would include?
I would. I'd also include that I know one of the agencies has Casimir is one of the agencies of the state that has a legal helpline. So they could look at in addition to what I spoke of, Casimir has a legal helpline, and that's people from all over the state can call. Survivors of domestic violence can call with questions of legal questions. That helpline. You are such a wealth of information for all of us.
Great resources.
Yes.
And, it sounds like things that stand out are it's important to definitely find trauma-informed helpers, whether it's an attorney, a therapist, an advocate. That stands out for me.
Yes,
I don't know
me too.
what stands out for you.
Yeah.
One of the many things, but does anything stand out for you,
I'm thinking
Michelle?
of the resources you included, JDI, also for survivors to really listen to what they need.
Yes.
Trusting themselves also stood out to me.
And I think, too, just take it step by step. And it might not be all at once, but take it step by step. And if you have any questions, reach out. Don't do it alone, right?
That's right.
That's a biggie. So
That's big.
anything else you want to add? Because we're just coming to the conclusion here.
I really appreciated it, talking and getting to talk about the subject. And thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thanks so much,
And thank
Lori.
you so much, Lori, for the excellent work you are doing. And you're an inspiration and a tremendous asset to survivors who are navigating the legal system. We really appreciate your knowledge and your skills. And thank you so much for taking this time with us.
And thank you all for listening to License to Listen with Lori Bassinger today. Please follow us on Facebook or Instagram at license.to-listen. And you can find our episode on domestic abuse, a therapeutic approach, on Apple or Spotify.
And Michelle, you want to add the domestic violence hotline in there?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Another resource.
The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233. Thanks, Nancy.
And thanks again for listening to this episode of License to Listen. Until next time, please take care of your mind and body. And remember, self-care is not selfish.